Today, let's see how long you would survive in these places. Potosí, Bolivia, 16th century. Today we go online and complain that our workplace is toxic. Trust me, the word toxic should be reserved for 16th century Potosí. Located high in the Andes Mountains, the air here was so thin that climbing a few steps already felt like your lungs were trying to resign from existence. But the altitude wasn't what killed you. The mountain killed you. Cerro Rico, a mountain practically made of silver. When the Spanish Empire discovered it, hundreds of thousands of indigenous people and slaves were forced into the mines like human fuel for an imperial ATM machine. Just imagine this. You crawl into a freezing black tunnel so cramped, you can't even stand up straight. No protective gear, no proper light. And every breath you take fills your lungs with mercury dust. The mercury slowly destroyed their nervous systems. So even if the mine didn't kill you immediately, your own body eventually would. Many workers died before the age of 30. But the most horrifying thing here wasn't the environment, it was human nature. To mint shiny silver coins and fuel the economy of Europe, millions of people were crushed inside this mountain. Locals gave it a nickname, the mountain that eats men. And the scariest part is, it worked incredibly well. London, England, 1858. Now let's move somewhere a little more civilized. London, 1858. When we imagine the Victorian era, we picture gentlemen in top hats, horse-drawn carriages, and classic British romance novels. But history hides a disgusting truth. The most advanced city on Earth at the time smelled like a giant open sewer. London had over 2 million residents, but almost no proper sewage system. So everything, human waste, dead animals, garbage, industrial chemicals, was dumped directly into the River Thames. Then came the summer of 1858. The heat was so brutal that the river basically turned into a giant boiling soup of death. The smell became so legendary that history gave the event its own name, the Great Stink, and humanity's reaction to it actually makes perfect biological sense. The human brain evolved to react strongly to the smell of rot because, for thousands of years, those smells usually meant disease and death. In other words, the nervous systems of Londoners were basically screaming at them, "Do not touch that water." And here comes the funniest part. The British government mostly ignored the disaster until the smell drifted directly into Parliament. Apparently, humanity only fixes problems after the smell becomes legally aggressive. They literally soaked curtains in chemicals just to avoid vomiting during meetings. Eventually, the British were forced to rip apart the city and build a massive underground sewer system. And somehow, modern public health was partially born from a river full of human waste. Human history really is just an extremely expensive bug-fixing process. Jamestown, North America, 1609. If London was disgusting, Jamestown, during the winter of 1609, was pure despair. History calls it the starving time. You know that feeling when you wake up at 2 a.m., open the fridge and realize there's nothing to eat? Now imagine that feeling lasting for months. You are trapped inside a tiny wooden fort. Outside are freezing blizzards and hostile arrows. Going outside almost guarantees death, but staying inside means there is absolutely nothing left to eat. First, they ate the horses, then the dogs, then the rats. When nothing living remained, they started boiling leather belts and shoes just to have something to chew on. And when even the leather was gone, they started looking toward the graveyard. The scariest thing about starvation isn't just what it does to the body, it bends the human mind. When people are starved long enough, the brain starts prioritizing survival over every moral rule we call civilization. Turns out, civilization depends heavily on people having enough calories. Only 60 out of 500 colonists survived that winter. It's a pretty horrifying reminder that the civilized human identity we are so proud of is actually much thinner than we want to believe. Donora, Pennsylvania, 1948. By 1948, humanity had entered its glorious industrial era. Factories were booming. Steel mills ran non-stop. Smoke poured into the sky so aggressively that people genuinely thought pollution smelled like economic progress, which is honestly one of the most human things ever. Then came the town of Donora, Pennsylvania, a small industrial town surrounded by hills that basically worked like a giant bowl trapping pollution inside. One week in October, a thick layer of smog rolled into town and refused to leave. At first, people thought it was just fog. Then the coughing started. The air became so toxic that residents struggled to breathe while simply walking outside. Visibility became so bad people could barely see down the street. Some reportedly tied ropes between buildings so they wouldn't get lost in the smog. And the worst part? Nobody fully understood what was happening. Because humans were still in that phase of industrial civilization where we casually filled the atmosphere with poison and acted surprised when the poison came back down. More than 20 people died within days. Thousands became seriously ill. The Donora disaster became one of the wake-up calls that eventually pushed governments toward modern air pollution laws. Turns out breathing is one of those annoying biological requirements humans keep needing. The Aral Sea, Central Asia, 1960s to 2000s. Sometimes history destroys a place with war. Sometimes humans slowly destroy it themselves with paperwork. The Aral Sea was once one of the largest lakes on Earth. Then the Soviet Union decided to reroute the rivers, feeding it to massively expand cotton farming. And for a while, it worked, which is usually the most dangerous stage of every terrible idea in history. Over the following decades, the lake kept shrinking, then shrinking more, then basically disappearing. Fishing towns suddenly found themselves stranded in the middle of a toxic desert filled with rusting shipwrecks. The former seabed became covered in salt and industrial chemicals. Winds carried contaminated dust for miles, causing enormous health problems for nearby populations. Imagine waking up every morning in a town where the ocean itself has abandoned you. Today, abandoned ships still sit in the sand like fossils from a civilization that accidentally speedran environmental collapse. Humanity really looked at one of the largest lakes on Earth and thought, yeah, we can probably move that. Pompeii, Roman Empire, 79 AD. Finally, Pompeii. In the previous locations, death arrived slowly. Here, nature chose jump scare mode. Pompeii was thriving. Great food, luxurious public baths, a strong economy. You're just sitting there eating grapes, enjoying life like a normal Roman citizen, when the mountain next door suddenly decides to reset the server. No sirens, no emergency alerts, no notifications on your phone. A cloud of ash and toxic gas hotter than 250 degrees Celsius slammed into the city at terrifying speed. You were basically cooked alive the moment you looked up at the sky. Pompeii basically became history's most horrifying snapshot. The same disaster that killed its citizens also preserved them forever. Nature essentially pressed pause on the city in its final moments. Panic, pain, people holding on to loved ones. And 2,000 years later, modern humans line up to take selfies with those stone-covered bodies. If you really think about it, history has an incredibly dark sense of humor. Looking back at these places, you realize the map of human history looks less like civilization and more like a giant minefield. So if you're feeling lucky that you don't have to boil your shoes for dinner tonight, leave a like and subscribe. And next time, which historical hell on earth should we visit?